Welcome to another episode of the Shadows Podcast. I'm your host, Trip Bodenheimer. And today I'm here with Coach Bill Curry. This is really cool opportunity for me. He is a speaker, leader, educator. Sir, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much. After our little difficulties, I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, yeah, I'm very much looking forward to this. And first thing we're going to do, I just got a random question, book recommendation for listeners out there.
Wow, there's so many great things. Um, there are a lot of biographies of Vince Lombardi,
Mhm.
and several of them are quite good. Um, but there's one in particular, When Pride Still Mattered, and the author's David Marinus. He wrote it years ago, but it's had sort of a revival, not just in the sport community, but in the community of responsible leadership. And most of all, Lombardi's finally seeming to get proper recognition for his absolute adherence to the right kind of approach to diversity. He didn't
Mhm.
care what color your skin was. He didn't care where you came from. He didn't care what your accent was or your politics. He cared a lot if you could play football, and he cared a lot if you were a decent person. So that is for our leaders, and especially those that uh, dominate like he did, his teams did, to bring and remember his success was in the '60s,
Yeah.
where racism was maybe even more rampant than it is now. um, and he wouldn't tolerate it. He wouldn't tolerate it at all. And Marinus writes beautifully about all the facets and the complications in Lombardi's personality and his family. And it's a thorough, well done biography. I reread it recently because I had read it years ago.
I'll definitely add that to our resource recommendations. I'll be checking that one out as well. Uh, but what I want to do is I want to get into your story because you got such an interesting story here to really unpack. Uh, what was childhood like for you in? Was it College Park? Or is that where you grew up?
College Park, Georgia. Yeah, it's most of where we grew up is under the runway at the Atlanta airport now,
Oh
and
wow, I was just there.
the specific area. My wife and I both grew up there. We met in the fourth grade, and she's the best thing that ever happened to me, uh, because I decided quickly I was going to marry her, and she was not the least bit interested. It took me 6 years to get a date, but now we've been married 60 years, so that one worked out. But if we go to an event at the convention center out near the airport, it's a beautiful facility. We can
Mhm.
actually walk around, and we do. And one of us will say, "Well, I think my house was right over there, and your house was over here in this block." We can actually sort of pinpoint the geographical coordinates of where we live. So that's kind of neat. Uh, when we do get to go out there, we grew up in College Park. My early childhood was very difficult. Um, because of my family situation, but it got better. And I grew up just sort of a normal kid in a sort of a normal middle class um, family with two beautiful sisters and a wonderful mom and dad. My dad had been a national weightlifting champion, and he'd had some
Wow.
hard times early in his life, which sort of spread to me for a while. But then he grew up. I sort of was able to observe him go from being an irreverent, angry guy to a wonderful Presbyterian Sunday school teacher for 50 years. It was quite a
Wow.
transition. And
Yeah.
that affected our whole family in a positive way. So we grew up like that, and grew up with sort of traditional Protestant values, and lived in the Jim Crow racist society. Uh, with all the horrors that means, and didn't understand anything about that growing up, and got the shock of my life when I went to the NFL because my assumption was that the African American guys would reject me and probably injure me and send me home. And they did just the opposite. They took me in, especially Willie Davis and Herb Adderley and a few guys like that with the Green Bay Packers. Those names are famous because they're in the NFL Hall of Fame. They're among the greatest players of all time, but they're also among the greatest human beings. They love this racist white kid from College Park, Georgia, unconditionally, and actually taught me how to behave, how to act. And they also taught me what I needed to do to make the team. Very special circumstances headed up by Vince Lombardi. And I didn't like Lombardi at all, but I love my teammates. And I learned to love Lombardi later after I left the Packers.
So much to unpack there. Uh, where did your love from football come from?
Oh, I didn't like football either at all. I hated football. I didn't even watch football. Um, had two goals in life. When I got to be about 12 years old, I had number one, I'm going to marry Carolyn Newton. She was the most beautiful girl in the world and the smartest kid in College Park, Georgia. And everybody thought that was a joke, but I was persistent. So
Paid
she's
off.
yeah, it paid off big time. Um, and my second goal was to pitch for the New York Yankees because I was obsessed with baseball. I loved baseball. And there was a little park in our little community, which was called Newton Estates. Um, and it had a baseball field with a backstop. So my buddies and I would play baseball all day, every day. In the summertime, we played probably 8, 10 hours a day. Just if there were just two of us, we would make up names of teams and we'd just make up games. And the only thing is, left field was a kudzu patch, and you didn't want to hit the ball in the kudzu patch because there were hornets down there and snakes and stuff. So it was an interesting field, but we didn't care. We just loved baseball so much. And then when I got in high school, um, I found out quickly, and we had an unusual configuration because senior high school was grades 8 through 12, all in one building. And that building's still there. It's not a high school anymore. It's not a conventional high school. It's a different kind of school. But I realized if you didn't play on the football team, you weren't going to ever get a date in your life. And Carolyn Newton was going to obviously be captain of the cheerleaders, which she later was. So I had to go out for football, but I sure wasn't happy about it. It was too hard. It was too demanding.
Well, you did something right on the gridiron because you ended up going to Georgia Tech. And how in the world you end up attending Georgia Tech and the Yellow Jackets program?
Well, first of all, it became clear when I was a junior in high school. I pitched in the state finals, Class AA baseball. We had a great team at College Park, and we got beat. I didn't have good stuff, and Rossville High School beat us 4-1. And I figured if I couldn't throw strikes against Rossville High School, I might not do so well against the Dodgers. So I really zeroed in on football and tried to improve and play my best. But to make matters go from bad to worse, my coaches had put me at the worst possible position, the position that nobody wanted to play, and nobody wants to hike the ball. And but there I was having to learn to hike the ball.
So my dad played center.
Did he? Well, tell
Yeah.
him he's a great man and I love him. But there I was. I was a short, fat, lazy kid in the eighth grade, and my coach put me at center. And he said, "Well, Bill, I guess you're going to have to learn to hike that ball." And I'm thinking, "No kidding, Coach Shaddix." Actually, I was thinking something else, but I can't say it here in this setting. uh, And so, worst possible thing that could have happened to short, fat, lazy Bill Curry, right? With my demanding father attending the games and watching to see if I was extending myself, which I took me a long time to learn to do that. But what looks like the worst thing that can happen to you, and this is what football teaches you, one of many things, what appears to be the worst possible thing might not be that at all. Because a few years later at Georgia Tech, I learned to hike that ball to Billy Lothridge, who was runner up for the Heisman Trophy when I hiked the ball to him. And in the Senior Bowl, after my senior season at Georgia Tech, I learned to hike that ball to Joe Willie Namath. And I was coached by the great Tom Landry for a week. And I've never forgotten that experience with those great human beings and many others on that Senior Bowl team. And then a few months after that, I went to the college all-star game and I hiked that ball to Roger Staubach and John Hewitt and Bob Timberlake and Craig Morton. And then I reported to training camp and I hiked that ball to Bart Starr and Zeke Bratkowski. And then a few years later, I got waived. I got put on the expansion list and got traded to the Baltimore Colts. And I hiked that ball to Johnny Unitas and Earl Morrall. And then in various games and on various teams, I learned to hike that ball to Bob Greasy and Francis Tarkington and Lynn Dawson and James Harris and Dan Pastorini. And so what happened to the short, fat, lazy kid? I ended up in a position, it's the only position in all of sport that would have allowed me to have a career. So that which appeared to be the worst thing that could have happened ended up being the best thing that could have happened. And there's a great lesson that I tried to teach all my players. Don't think that this is the worst thing because it may be the best thing. It's so much of it depends on how you go about it. And since I didn't have any choice, I had to just start trying to get good at it and do my best. It took me forever to learn that. But once you learn that and you continue to give your best and you refuse to give in to the fatigue and the barbs and the cruelty and what we've loosened in the world today is illogical hatred at its worst. If you can fight through all of that, and you have to, then what appeared to be such a bad thing might be the best thing that could have happened.
What what a who's who of names you just named right there. Oh my gosh.
Can you imagine? There I was. Not only did I pass the ball to those guys, my job was to be their personal protector. I had the
Yeah,
privilege of protecting the greatest leaders and quarterbacks in the history of our game up until that time, sir.
yeah.
And I didn't think much about it until it was over. And then I said, oh my gosh, look what happened. It's a gift from God that I
Oh,
had this
100%.
privilege to be in the presence of that many incredible humans. They weren't just great players, they were great human beings, most of them.
Well, also talk about Coach God and uh how was that experience at Georgia Tech?
Well, my dad was a Georgia Bulldog, so I grew
So
up
that
in
went
there.
over well.
Yeah. Um, but my high school counselor called me in and said, Bill, I understand you're considering Georgia Tech. And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, don't. I said, don't what? She said, don't consider Georgia Tech. And I said, why? She said, well, you're not a stupid boy, Bill, but you wouldn't survive 2 semesters at Georgia Tech. They have national merit scholars. I mean, they take calculus and physics and organic chemistry. You just wouldn't have a chance. And I mean, you're not a stupid boy, but you have frolicked all the way through high school. So I thanked her and went down to the library and looked up the word frolic. And she was right. But what she didn't know is that I had gotten a hold of a map. And I had learned that the Georgia campus was not the closest campus to Agnes Scott College. And guess who was going to be at Agnes Scott College, a girls' school in Decatur, Georgia? Yes, young Carolyn Newton. And I was not going to go far from her, and I still haven't. She's right in the next room right now, and she's not going anywhere. And I'm not either. I know she would love to have booted me many times in the last 60 years, but I'm still around and I'm not leaving now. I had already made that decision and nothing was going to change it. So I did end up, and Coach Dodd's opening statement was a pure giveaway to who he was and how he regarded us. He said, now, men, if you're not a good football player, that's not your fault. That's my fault because I invited you here. So we're not going to run you off. A lot of the schools in this part of the country at that time were signing 60 kids and running off 30 of them during training camp, just driving them to where, finding it was pro training camps, basically.
Yeah.
He said, we're not going to do that. We're going to keep you. We're going to love you. We're going to respect you. We're going to make sure you get the right kind of tutoring to compete with the, you are going to be surrounded by national merit scholars, and some of you are, and some of you aren't as qualified as others. But you're going to be able to compete because you're going to sit on the front row and you're going to attend every single class, and you're going to learn to take notes, and you're going to learn to think, and you're going to learn to compete. He would say, now, my record at Tennessee when I was a quarterback was 27-1. And I'm a second quarter sophomore at the University of Tennessee, and I'm 53 years old. That is not going to happen to you. You're going to graduate with a diploma from one of the greatest schools in the world because you're going to learn to think, you're going to learn to work, and I'm going to help you do it. That was his speech every year, and he was deadly serious about it.
Yeah.
I cut one class my freshman year. I'm not making this up. I was 17 years old. I was an idiot. And I thought, I need to sleep more than I need to go to chemistry at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, I know they can't catch me because there are 100 kids in the class, right?
Right.
The next day, my name was on the bulletin board. I still don't know how he caught me, but he did. And the bulletin said, Bill Curry, report to Grant Field. It's now Bobby Dodd Stadium, but it was Grant Field at the time. 5:30 a.m. Wednesday morning in your running gear. They ran me up and down the west stands until I could not stand up. And about the 50th time up and down the stadium steps, I decided that chemistry at 8 o'clock in the morning was a wonderful thing. here's the I never cut another class. I graduated from the Georgia Institute of Technology only because my football coach loved me too much to allow me to self-destruct when I could not see my own potential.
What did that mean to you to fast forward on the road and you ended up getting the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year award?
You're asking me about that specific moment when
Yeah,
I was
going kind of
informed
full circle.
that
Yeah.
I had been awarded that. I was at Alabama, and I closed my office door, and I wept and wept. I really did.
Yeah.
It was hard to believe. It still is.
Yeah.
Because that great man changed so many of our lives that and every single one of us is grateful.
Yeah.
And so that meant probably more to me than it did to most. It means a lot to everybody that receives it, but that's the one that all the head coaches want. I can tell you that right now, because it
Especially you
stands
having that
for
connection with them.
integrity and discipline. No, I mean, I'm talking about the guys that don't have a connection with him all over America.
Mm-hmm.
When we make that announcement, uh, you talk to the guys at the convention, this is the one they all would love to
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. What's something he said or did that you catch yourself all these years later still doing.
Now, men, these guys are bigger than you are. They're faster than you are. They're probably a little tougher than you are. And they're going to hit you hard. It's going to be tough. It's going to be hot out there. I want you to watch them, though, because, see, we only have one advantage. But I want you to watch them in warm-ups. They're going to come out during warm-ups, and they're going to be running all swarming around the field, slapping each other upside the head and crashing into each other and running wind sprints and using up their energy. And a couple of them are going to throw up on the sideline just for good measure. We're not going to do any of that. We're going to warm up intelligently. We're going to have directed energy because, see, our one advantage, the advantage we do have, we're smarter than they are. And we were stupid enough to believe that. But we did believe it. He made us believe it. You'd say, now, what do I mean by smarter? What I mean is we play field position. We'd rather them have the ball on their 20-yard line than us have it on our 20. Of course, offenses weren't the same as they are today. And you want them deep in their territory. And we would punt. He would punt on third down sometime if it was long yardage and make them start inside their 20, knowing that they weren't going to be able to drive the length of the field. And we get the ball back in better field position. He knew how to do that, and he knew how to make calls. He'd say, "Now I want you to watch them closely." And remember warm-ups. And that may sound strange to you. We're in the middle of a game and you think about the warm-ups. Because when we get about the middle of the third quarter, because they wasted all that energy, smashing each other upside the head and running around during warm-ups, they're going to start getting tired. We're not going to be tired. They're going to be exhausted. By the time they get in the fourth quarter, they're going to be exhausted. And when they do that, they're going to make a mistake. And when they make a mistake, I'm going to think of something and we're going to beat them. And it happened over and over and over. And you know what it was called? It was called Dodd's luck. It was not luck. He knew his people and he knew the game. Bear Bryant said, I would rather look across the field on Saturday afternoon and see anybody other than Dodd because he can beat you with his brain.
Knew how to get the most out of his players.
Yeah, he did.
Well, you ended up going to the Green Bay Packers, and this is really interesting part of this story that I'm curious about. NFL champion 1965. You were actually a champion of Super Bowl one, and I mean Vince Lombardi. So many questions about the Packers. You know, what was it like playing for Coach Lombardi, and then about the Green Bay Packers and how they've just been this dynasty forever and a day. But what was the culture of Green Bay like at that time?
Well, for me, the NFL had 20 rounds in those days.
Yep.
And I was drafted 20th as a future. And the Pat Pepler was Lombardi's personnel man. He loved to tell this story publicly, and he enjoyed it. So he said he was staying with Vince, and it was 2 a.m, and Vince turned to him and said, "Pepler, we've drafted 19 players. It's 2 a.m. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed. Do something humorous with the 20th selection." And he walked off. He said, "So we did." And here it is. I was the humor in the 20th selection. So honestly, walked into that training camp as the last draft choice. I had left, having left the college all-star game. So I was already 2 weeks late into the Lombardi training camp. Now it was excused absence because in those days, the college all-star team that was selected by the American Football Coaches Association, they played against the NFL champions from the year before.
Mm-hmm.
He actually played a game against the Cleveland Browns. And by the way, that was 1965. That's the last time the Browns won the thing. That's not too good for those guys. But I was walking in 2 weeks late, and you asked me, what's the culture like? Well, here's the beginning. of course, I'm terrified. Every rookie is. And of course, I'm wondering, I'm getting ready to walk over to dinner. Are they going to make me sing? I mean, are they going to make fun of me? Are they going to ridicule me because I'm the last draft? I mean, all that stuff goes through
Yeah.
your mind. And I mean, you're scared. You really are. I mean, all these guys that have been larger than life all these years. I mean, Ray Nitschke's going to be in there in the dining hall. David Robinson is going to be in. I mean, Forrest Gregg, Jerry Kramer, Fuzzy Thurston, Bob Skoronski. I mean, all these guys are Hall of Famers already, and they had already won 2 world championships. They were getting ready to win 3 more in a row at that moment. Nobody knew that at the time. So I was really in a shaky state of mind. And as I walked, um, I sensed, I mean, nothing was said, and I wasn't jostled or touched or anything, but I sensed that somebody was walking beside me. And I turned and looked, and it was Bart Starr. And I said, "Oh, Mr. Starr, what are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm walking with you, and don't give me any of that Mr. stuff. I'm just Bart." And he said, "I'd like to walk over to dinner and let's have dinner, okay, Bill?" I said, "Sure, yeah, okay." Then he said, if you'd like, my wife and I believe that we have a wonderful minister at our church. And I don't know what your faith is, but we have a Methodist minister, and he's a great guy. And if you'd like to go to church with us tomorrow and come have Sunday dinner at our house, we'd like that. Could you do that? I said, "I believe I can make that." Yeah. Are you kidding me? That's how I was greeted at the Green Bay Packer training camp.
Yeah.
And it was mind boggling that those great men, and Bart Starr, and this is another entire separate chapter, but he stayed by my side every day the rest of his life as long as he lived. He was one of the great friends and one of the great human beings that I ever knew in my life. Later in that training camp, my anxiety about being on a team, my biggest problem was not being the last draft choice. My biggest problem was not that I was going to a place. I mean, Carol and I were both pretty well educated, but we didn't know if Green Bay, Wisconsin was in the contiguous 48 states. I mean, we had to look at a map to see. I mean, Wisconsin? Neither of us had ever been anywhere. And so it was like being in a foreign land. And to make matters worse, my biggest issue was that I had never been in a huddle with an African American person.
Mhm.
I didn't know how to behave with those great big African American guys that were such great players, and it turns out great human beings. And one night I was walking out of the dorm, and the defensive captain, Willie Davis, had walked out before me, and this voice came out of the darkness. "Bill." I thought it was God. I almost collapsed in the grass. And it was Willie Davis. He said, "Son, I've been watching you. I'd like to talk to you a minute." I said, "Oh my gosh, he's going to tell me to go home, get lost." That's not what he did. He said, "I really like your effort. You try so hard." That was true. And he said, "I think you got a chance to make our team." And I just want to tell you a little story quickly here. He said, when we played in our first world championship game in Philadelphia, 1960, he said, I was a young player and I didn't play my best and we got beat. He said, I stood outside that stadium and I looked out there on that field and I realized that Willie Davis had left regrets on the field.
Mm.
And I made up my mind, this will never, ever happen to Willie Davis again. He said, now you come on our practice field You leave no regrets tomorrow and the next day and the next and the next. And you just might make our team. And when you don't think you can take it another minute, you come find me and I'll get you through it. Get you through it. Can you imagine?
Oh
I
yeah.
said, really? We call him Dr. Feelgood. And Nishki would be tearing my head off. And, I mean, the first day, Nishki broke my face mask and knocked me out. Well, that's just stuff that happens in the NFL. Um, and I could go run find Willie Davis on the practice field and say, "How you feel, old man?" He said, "Feel good, man. Feel good. You can do it. You can do it." That is a teammate. That, well, of course, he was captain of the greatest football team of all time. There's
Yeah.
a reason. There's a reason for that kind of leadership.
Speaking of leadership, Coach Lombardi, you mentioned you weren't a fan of him at first.
No,
How was that experience?
he said, your priorities will be your religion, your family, and the Green Bay Packers.
Oh, Jim
That's
Valvano did that speech.
Valvano. Yeah, Valvano was hilarious.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
he and I became buddies in the ACC. He did it, except that he got the name wrong with his team. Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
He was
he's like
he was
Rutgers
coaching Iona.
basketball.
He said, "Yeah, your religion, your family, and the Green Bay Packers."
Yeah.
But he
Famous
was,
SB speech.
yeah. Um, but Lombardi was so powerful with his, not just his rhetoric, but with his attention to detail, his brilliance, and his repetition. And he was scathing with his comments and his remarks. And I come from Bobby Dodd, the Southern gentleman, and I didn't like any of that. And I was critical of him. And I criticized him to Bart because Bart would listen to me, shoot my mouth off. And I said, somebody said, Coach, plus he was Catholic, and I didn't know anybody who was Catholic. And he was a Yankee, and we weren't supposed to like Yankees. So, I mean, there I was surrounded by all kinds of people I wasn't supposed to like, talking about my Jim Crow culture. Thank you, folks, for that. And not my mom and dad, but everything around me. Um, so I went to Bart one day and I was very critical. I said, there's no way that listen to Coach Lombardi's language. I mean, there's no way somebody said he goes to church every day. Nobody goes to church every day, especially talking like he talks. And Bart said, don't be critical, Bill. Don't be judging people. Lesson number one from Bart Starr, don't
Yeah.
be judgmental. What a great lesson. He said, as a matter of fact, he does go to church every day. He's a daily celebrant. He goes to mass. No, he's not perfect. Yes, he makes mistakes, but he's a very sincere Christian, just like you. And he goes to church every single day. But there's something you need to realize. When you've been working for this man about 3 weeks, you're going to realize this man needs to go to church every day. So we agreed on that. But I mean, I just learned so many powerful lessons in such a rapid fire style and so quickly in that environment that um, Lombardi's constant hammering of his basic principles was such that you could not avoid absorbing them and taking them into your heart. And to this day, when I'm wallowing around in self-pity, his voice will come to me. Suck it up. Suck up your guts. Get up off the ground. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. Yeah, he was right.
What's the one thing he said that really resonated with you the most?
Well, there were two things, one more important than the other. The first was a football thing, a team thing. But we were in Detroit my rookie year, and the only team in the league that was not intimidated by the Packers was the Detroit Lions. They had Joe Schmidt, Roger Brown, Night Train Lane, and you won't recognize these names, but old football people sure do. I mean, all those guys are Alex Karras, these are a bunch of Hall of Famers, and these great Packer teams they always had a couple of losses, and they were usually to the Lions. The Lions would crush the Packers from time to time, and they were killing us at the half. We were playing in Tiger Stadium, the old baseball stadium, and the score was 21-3. They had just intercepted a pass up and run it in the end zone against Bart. So at 21-3, and one of the Lions players comes waddling by. I'm not going to say who it was, but he comes walking by Lombardi, and the benches were on the same sideline because it was a baseball field and the configuration was such that they set it up like that. So he walks right by Lombardi. I mean, 3 feet from Vince Lombardi. And again, I can't use the language he used, but he said words to the effect, "How do you like that? You bleeping wop." And I thought, oh, God's going to strike him dead right now, and I'm going to get to watch. Well, that didn't happen. He just kept on going. And I turned and looked at Coach Lombardi, and he smiled. I thought he would rip the guy or something like he did us. He just smiled, kind of shook his head. Well, we run in the locker room. NFL halftime's 12 minutes. And I thought, and everybody in there, even all those veterans, was shaking like a leaf. Well, they knew what was coming. I mean, nobody could rip you like Vince Lombardi. Nobody ever in my life. So we knew that was coming, and it didn't. He no showed. He didn't even come in the locker room. So we're counting down. It's time to go out and kick off for the second half. And with about 30 seconds left, he walks in. He'd been standing in the dugout outside the locker room the whole time. And he looked around the room. And maybe it's my imagination, but it felt like he got eye contact with all 40 guys. We had a 40-man roster then. And this is what he said: "Men, we're the Green Bay Packers." He turned around and walked out. And what do you think happened in the second half?
Well, y'all are probably running through the doors on your way out there.
We ran them out of the stadium. And
Yeah.
why did Lombardi smile at the profane greeting from the Detroit player? He smiled because he knew that the Lions thought the game was over, and he knew his team, and he knew the game was not over. We blew them out. And it was the greatest halftime speech I've ever heard because he didn't have to say a word. He had taught us so well. He had hammered his principles into our souls so hard and so well that he didn't have to do anything but to remind us of who we are. And then the second and more important words he spoke to me. I have a hard time telling this, but I have to.
Yeah.
He was dying in the Georgetown Hospital, and he and I had parted on very bad terms. He had put me on the expansion list for the New Orleans Saints team. I blamed him for doing such a terrible thing to me, and nobody's fault but mine. He put me on the list because I wasn't among the better players on that team. And that was a great football team. He put me on the list because he had to. And I had gotten traded to the Baltimore Colts, and we had a great team in Baltimore. And I got cocky. I got full of myself. And I said a lot of terrible things about Vince Lombardi publicly. And if I'd have had any guts, I'd have gone and sat down with him and looked him in the eye and said those things. That's what you do if you're a man. But I was still a boy. I was still an idiot at the time. And a teammate of mine, it was pretty much acknowledged that the coach wasn't going to make it. And Bob Long, another great teammate, called me. He said, "I know where you are." I was in Washington, D.C., working for the Players Association. He said, "I know where you're staying, and I'm going to come pick you up, and we're going to go see Coach Lombardi." I said, "No, we're not." they wouldn't let me in the room. He would throw me out, and I wouldn't blame him. And I no way am I doing that. He said, I just told you I know where you are, and if I have to drag your big, you know what, out of that hotel, I will. I'm going to put you in my car, and I'm taking you to that hospital. So we went and lit a candle for Coach, and we walked in the room. Mrs. Lombardi, Marie, had always loved Carolyn and me like we were her own. I felt terrible when I saw her, but I thought she might slap me or something, but she put her arm around me and led me over to the bed. And his right arm was all full of IVs. So I took his left hand and tried my best to say something. Something like, Coach, I came here to apologize. Those stupid things I said, I didn't mean them. And I want you to know that I'm sorry and that you've meant a lot to my life. And his body, of course, was emaciated, but his eyes never wavered. They hadn't changed at all. He squeezed my hand and he said, well, you can mean a lot to my life, Bill, if you'll pray for me. That was the end of the conversation. But he was a powerful, riveting, spiritual force. Not perfect, certainly, but a great man and an incredible football coach.
Yeah. That's I appreciate you opening up and sharing that with us. What amazing stories to hear. And you, well, it's crazy the times of back then where a Super Bowl ticket was $12. Now I don't think you can find a $12 Super Bowl ticket anymore. Uh, but
No.
I don't think anything in that stadium is $12 at this point, including beverages. But yeah, $12 to $8,000 now for a Super Bowl ticket. But do you ever imagine Super Bowl one, Super Bowl three? You were in the Super Bowl with Joe Namath, the big upset of Super Bowl three, and then Super Bowl five. Did you ever imagine the Super Bowl would get to what it is today? But then also, you had like the highest of highs in the Super Bowl, winning one and five, and then some would say one of the biggest upsets in sports history when the Jets upset you on Super Bowl three.
Yeah, that was a nightmare because we were we were 15-1.
Yeah,
We
heavily
had we had lost one game, and it was to Cleveland, and we had just gone to Cleveland and played them in the NFL title game and beat them 34-0.
mm-hmm.
We were going to be remembered as the greatest team of all time, and it was a great football team. It really was. But we went out against the Jets, and they had an excellent game plan. Joe was brilliant. Matt Snell was brilliant. And they blocked us, and we made mistakes that we had not made all year long. And when you do that against a good team, you're going to get beat. They won the game, and the sad thing about American sport, I think, and I'm not sure if it's true everywhere, it may be true everywhere now because of the power of social media and television, but if you get into the big game, you better win it. Because the only thing people remember about the 68 Baltimore Colts is that we were losers. But our final record was 15-2. The year before, in 1967, we were 11-1-2 and did not make the playoffs. So, I mean, that was a great team for all those years. Then we go back in 1970 to Super Bowl V, and we win the game, but still play terrible. So all the Super Bowls, and I got injured and had to leave Super Bowl one. So none of the Super Bowls are particularly happy for me selfishly, but for my teams in 1 and 5, yeah, great. I'm thrilled about that. And we all love our rings. I've quit wearing my ring because they're too valuable now. If I were to lose one, it would be awful.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a strange scenario, but what you get from team sport can't be measured in notoriety or fame or money or jewelry or contracts. It's measured in the incredible love between teammates. And the hardest thing in my life right now is that I'm losing my teammates. My
Mm.
teammates are dying. And it just seems unfair, but I mean, we're all in our late 70s or early 80s. And that's what happens. Even if you didn't play a violent sport. Um, to me, that's to have that many brothers and to have our families be as close as we were through the years. The hardest thing is to lose those beautiful friendships, but they have been so wonderful, and that's the real payoff.
Yeah. And last thing, when I ask you about your pro career before we get into coaching journey, is Don Shula. I mean, the list of people you've played for, the list of people you've had coach you, I mean, it's incredible. And Don Shula, what was that experience like?
Saved my career. Um, I was moping and feeling sorry for myself because I'd been put on the expansion list, and I got a phone call, and I've got some pretty salty buddies, and I thought for a minute one of the guys was doing a number on me because his voice said, "Hi, this is Don Shula," and I thought, "Shit." You know, so I started to mess with him and say something stupid, thinking it was one of my high school teammates or something. Then I thought, you know what? You probably ought to just play this
Put them out
straight.
for a minute.
Yeah, it was Don Shula. And he said, Bill, we're thinking about a trade with the new Saint team. What he really wanted was that number one draft choice so he could draft Bubba Smith out of Michigan State. But they were dickering about who was going to be the throw in here and the throw in there, different players and draft choices to make the deal. And Shula was the first that I'm aware of who really majored in special teams. He won a lot of games. He happens to have won more games than any coach in the history of football. And one of the big reasons is because of his incredible emphasis on special teams. Well, Bobby Dodd, same thing. So I could play every special team every week for the rest of my life because I had been trained that way for 5 years at Georgia Tech. Shula knew that. I was a long snapper. I could play on punt return, kickoff coach, and I could play all literally every single one of the special teams. And he loved that stuff. And he said, I'm calling you not to ask your permission to make a trade, but I want to know if you would be happy if I bring you here and you just play special teams. My answer was this, Coach, I would walk to Baltimore to play for you, and I'll play anything you want me to, anytime, all day, every day. And so that's how I got to go to Baltimore. And he gave me chance after chance after chance. The first game of the first time we had played a league game with Shula as the coach, we were playing the Atlanta Falcons on national TV, and he made me special teams captain, which is one of the biggest thrills. Can you imagine going out for the coin toss and they say, and the official says, "This is Captain Unitas and this is Captain Curry." And the other guy in the Falcons said, "Captain who?" just the opportunity to walk out there and be the
Yeah.
special teams captain, you know. Well, about the middle of the third quarter, I clipped a guy right in front of our bench on an 80-yard punt return, and it was called back. Well, Shula came sprinting on the field. He was very volatile. He grabbed me by the shoulder pads and shook me and screamed some really interesting profanity in my face.
Yeah.
And so he crossed the white line, and we had a thing. One of his things was, once you cross the white line, you're going to be totally aggressive. So I screamed back in the same language that he had screamed at me. And so we're watching the film on Tuesday morning, And John Sandusky, the assistant coach, said, "Curry, is that a clip?" I said, "Well, it might be, coach. Yeah, it might be." He said, "Well, let me make a suggestion. The next time you decide to dog cuss the head coach on national television, you make damn sure that it's not a clip. Do you understand?" Well, my wife was flying in with our 5-week-old baby girl, and I was going to have a one-game career with the Baltimore Colts. I was going to have to drive home with my two girls, because Kristen was 5 weeks old, our daughter. Um, I just couldn't think of a worse nightmare. How could I blow this so fast? So I went and found Sheila, and he took me in the equipment room. I'll never forget it if I live to be 1,000. Um, and he just stood there kind of smiling. And I said, "Coach, I don't know. I'm so sorry. I've lost my cool, and I didn't think I had clipped the guy. And you've taught us when we cross the white line to be aggressive and be tough and all that. And I just screamed those things. But I promise you this, it'll never happen again." You know what he did? He smiled and he said, "I kind of like that. Just don't clip the guy." Wow. You think I played hard for him?
Oh,
Golly. He had me from that day, from that moment. I would do anything for that guy. And plus, then he tried me at various positions because I sort of wanted to be a linebacker and I wasn't good enough. So he let me play linebacker for a whole year. Then he moved me back to center, and then I played for a long, long time. And I owe it all to him.
this is coaching stories, this incredible leadership lessons here through each one of these. And you ended up a stint with the Oilers, the Rams, and you retired, you went into coaching at your alma mater, Georgia Tech. What was that experience like? You were assistant there first, then the head coach in there. You got an ACC Coach of the Year trophy, and you turned that Georgia Tech program 9-2-1 All American Bowl appearance. How was that experience coaching in Atlanta?
Well, it became a spiritual journey
Mm,
because I had become jaded in the National Football League, and I'm not blaming the league, but the league can be uh, there are a lot of negative influences when you're, especially if you're on great teams and everybody's telling you how terrific you are. Or then the next week they're telling you how terrible you are, and you're being sent to the new team in New Orleans, and then next year they're telling you how terrific you are again. And it's hard to keep your bearings as a human being, and I didn't do
yeah.
very well. I didn't do very well. Being back at Tech in 1976, I was an assistant, but that was just 1 year because Bart Starr had promised me. A lot of people make promises like this. "Look, man, if I ever get a big job, I'm going to hire you." Well, we've all heard that. And how many of them keep their word? Well, Bart kept his word. So I had just been the O line coach for the Packers for 3 years when I was hired back to Georgia Tech to be the head coach. And the worst possible preparation to be a college head coach is to play in the NFL for a long time. And I played 10 years because you think you know a lot of football. Oh man, I played for Vince Lombardi and Don Shula. That doesn't mean you know anything. All I knew how to do was hike the ball and be run over slowly. That's all I knew. It took every ounce of my being to function as an offensive center. And so I wasn't learning about staff formation or play calling or defensive structure or coverages or routes. I didn't know about recruiting. I didn't know about what we had to do to fill the stadium. I didn't know any of the things that you really need to be a quality head coach in college. So I had to learn them on the job. And I really believe that God took me in his hand because he said, "Look, you can," somehow the message came clear to me. "You can think about and write about and work hard on all those things that you're talking about, but not one of them is as important as those human beings, those teenage males. You're going to shape their lives. And you better get your act together, buddy. I mean, it was almost as if I heard that when I walked in the first team meeting. When I stood and looked at all those 105 expectant faces, wow. I thought, I got to do better than I've been doing. I got to do better than I've ever done. And I tried my best every day I was a coach to teach my guys the stuff that was positive and helpful. Um, and the thing about loving your teammates, and the thing about not allowing not even a shred of prejudice to be on our team ever. Mm. And that what our sport teaches is that when you come in and out of that locker room, that sweat smells the same on everybody. Mm. When I get busted in my mouth, and I got a bloody mouth, my teammate gets busted in the mouth, that blood's the same color. And we don't ever look down our nose at anybody. You're going to learn to love each other here because I'm going to see to it that you do. I even had guys come to me and say, I'm not dressing next to him, coach. I said, yeah, you are. Oh, you can't do that, coach. Well, I can do anything I want to. I'm the head coach. I can send you home. You don't have to stay here. But if you do, you're going to dress next to that guy. And those guys ended up loving each other more times than not, because the sweat really does smell the same. And you really do need your teammate in the fourth quarter. And you're really not worried about winning the game or getting a new contract or trying to up the ratings and get in a bowl game. You're trying to stay alive and hope you don't quit before the game's over, because you're dying out there. It's that hard. Sport is so hard. Our sport is. And that's what creates friendships that last the rest of your life. And that's the reward. It's not the bowl rings, and it's not the records, and there's no such thing as coach of the year. They're teams of the year, yeah, but it takes everybody. And it was just such a privilege to be with all those great young men all those years. And I think however God works with us, that's what he chose with me. You're not going to mess this up, buddy. I'm going to be right here watching you.
Well, you ended up going to right up the road from where I'm at right now. You ended up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, uh, with Crimson Tide, which, I mean, just dominant for the past, what, 20 years or so now. But this, you really brought them back into prominence since Bear Bryant had left. 10-1 in 1989. And the question I have for you, a couple of questions here about coaching, kind of to put it all together. How did you balance personal and professional life as a head coach with a family and kids?
Not very well. Not well at all. It's the biggest mistake of my life. Um, by the way, our kids are both great. Our daughter is now, I won't say how old she is. She's not 5 weeks old anymore. She's got two daughters of her own. One of which is they're both, we got 7 grandchildren. Our son has 5 boys.
Wow.
And each of the grandchildren is perfect. I'm serious.
Spoiled
every one of them is perfect. If I can spoil them, I will spoil them till the day I croak. Because I never dreamed that kids could be so wonderful. So both our children have done a great job of raising their kids. And when they were little, I thought my job was to be at the office of 90 hours a week, 100 hours a week. We were competing to, and you know good and well, when you're at Alabama, you better be working harder than the other guy. Well, the same thing at Georgia Tech or Kentucky or any of them. And it wouldn't have not been difficult at all to carve out more family time. And I wish I had done that. And when I get a chance to talk to young coaches now, that's what I hammer at. Do not make that mistake because you can do the job for your players, your student athletes, and not neglect your wife and children. My wife did an incredible job with both our kids, and they both turned out fine. But I wish I had spent more time with them.
There's a retired chief master sergeant in the Air Force, Gaylor, who said that too many times when we get successful, we're like that guy at the halftime show that's spinning plates on a stick. He said, we want people to look at us and we're spinning 8 different plates, but we tend to drop family and keep all their plates spinning. We drop the china and keep the paper plates going because it looks great and the crowd applauds us. And I thought that
That's a
was a
great metaphor. It really is.
yeah. What who was the harshest critic for you? Was it yourself? Was it the fan base, especially somewhere like Tuscaloosa, and you go like 0-3 with Auburn, and they just want to run you out of town almost, or was it the media? Who do you think was the top critic?
I don't know, and I really don't care. You can't go to 0-3 against Auburn. You can't do that. You got to beat Auburn. If you're a competitor, you know that. And we
Yeah.
didn't do it. Um, we had to beat Auburn. And naturally, I relive those games. Here I am, 80 years old. I still wake up thinking about certain plays and certain calls and certain parts of the preparation that we should have done better. Those things never go away. Um, and I don't care who the critics were or the most critical. But if you ask the toughest critics, uh, the hardest critic I ever had was Bobby Dodd, not while I was playing for him, but when I came back as a head coach.
Really?
Yeah. Um, I invited him, I asked him to come see me on Mondays and tell me watch the game, coach, and teach me how to be a head coach because I realized that I was in over my head. He said, "Are you sure you want this?" And I said, "Oh yes, sir. I'm sure. I'm lucky to still have you around." And he would walk in my office. One day we played North Carolina. He had 44 mistakes I made in one game, and we went down the list and argued about them. And I made a, a reasonable argument on 3 points. The other 41, he was dead right. It was so obvious. And I said to him that day, I said, "How could I be this stupid, coach?" And he said, "Well, you're not stupid. How long do you think I've been doing this?" I said, he said, "You know how old I am?" I said, "Yes, sir, you're 73." He said, "I've been doing this since I was 12." So I've been doing it, what, 62 years or something like that, 61 years. How long you been doing it? 3 years? That's why I'm smarter than you. And you'll get it. But you have to learn these lessons. But
Yeah.
he would chew my butt out. He would say, "The reason your legs are tired on Saturdays because you're killing the guys on the practice field." I said, "Gosh, coach, I learned those practice procedures from Don Shula." He said, "Well, let me ask you something." I'll never forget these words. "How many chemistry labs did you go to when you played for Don Shula? How many calculus tests were you preparing at the library till 2 a.m. when you played for Don Shula? When you played for Don Shula, you guys went home at 4 o'clock and took a nap every afternoon. That's what, and by the way, you're not Don Shula. We've seen that already." It was brutal. That was the harshest critic I ever had, and the best.
Yeah. How does it feel like in hindsight? You mentioned you wake up and you look back at some of those games, but how does it feel to know that you kind of laid the foundation for Georgia Tech to win a national title about a handful of years later, and you leave Alabama a handful of years later, they win a national title as well. How does it feel knowing like you started to kind of lay down the bricks there?
Well, I told the Alabama guys that they were going to win the national championship. I didn't know who their coach was going to be, but Gene came in and did a great job. Um, but I could see it in the room. I could see it in their eyes, and I could see the fabric in that 10-win season. Should have been a 12-win season. And I mean that. With the right calls and the right preparation, we would have finished the thing undefeated, but we didn't. And that the next 2 or 3 years later, whenever they did it, and I was really happy for them. But that's the one that I could see coming because there were just too many gritty competitors on that team
Yeah.
to keep them down.
And you went on to be an analyst, ESPN. I still remember you broadcasting. Uh, like I said, I was a huge college football fan here. Best game that you ever witnessed in person as an analyst?
Wow, the best game? That's a hard one. Let's see here. The best, what I'd rather do is to pick out a, a season, and it was my first season as an analyst.
Okay.
Um, and I don't remember a specific game being the best one, but I watched a team that was at Michigan that was a good team, not a great team at the beginning of the season, and they had one phenomenal player who is one of the best football players I've ever seen, Charles Woodson, who's now in the NFL Hall of Fame. He was getting ready to do things that year that I don't think anybody's done before or since because he played corner, but he also played offense when they needed him, and he ran kicks back and for touchdowns. And he was just
Heisman poses.
unspoken, yeah, all that. Um, but they had a solid plan. They had a really good approach to their team, and they stuck with it. And every week, and sometimes it would be close, and they would not look good for a while, but somehow they would manage to eke out a win. And Lloyd Carr was the coach,
Mhm.
and he had a plan, and he had based it on those guys that gosh, now I can't remember the explorer's name, but they went to Antarctica. Some really hard-nosed guys that lived through the horrors of Antarctica, and Lloyd would stand up and quote this guy and say, "That is leadership. That is leadership." And he just pounded that. He just worked that into his players' hearts. And by golly, they ended up winning the national championship. And I watched them progress from a good Big Ten team to a great football team. And their quarterback was Brian Greasy,
Yeah.
who also became an analyst. And his father, Bob, had been a great player for many years against us, actually, for the Dolphins.
Is it Sherpas? Was that they were called in Antarctica?
I think the Sherpas weren't the Sherpas. That was on Mount Everest, weren't they?
Was it Mount Everest?
I'm not sure, but anyhow, um, Lloyd beat up old football coach, remembering the coaches, and they weren't pep talks. He would call up his team after practice, and he would put this information in their brain, thinking about what real Shackelford was the guy's name
Hmm.
that headed that expedition, and they were just tough as nails. And I mean, those living conditions in that climate are almost impossible. Anyhow, I think that was, and that being my very first year, it was exciting to be a part of it and try to grow as an analyst along the way.
Yeah. And you also had a book, 10 Men You Met in the Home. How cool of an experience was it to put that together?
Well, my wife and George Plimpton was a very famous writer who his moniker for himself was participative um, journalist, meaning if he was going to cover the Celtics, he went and played basketball with the Boston Celtics. Uh, he pitched in the Major League All-Star game. Um, and he played quarterback with the Detroit Lions in their training camp and wrote bestseller called Paper Line. Uh, and then he came to the Baltimore Colts and played 4 plays in an exhibition game against the Lions with us when I was still playing. And he and I became fast friends. And he and I wrote a book together in 1977 called One More July, which was mostly me talking into a recorder, and George did the editing, which he did beautifully. But then, as the time passed, he and my wife Carolyn, who's also an author, they just harassed me into doing 10 Men book. So I did do it, and but I did it under duress and I did it under protest, and it would have never happened if I hadn't been cajoled into it. But I enjoyed it once I started on it.
Well, final question, and I do appreciate this. This is an amazing leadership lesson here. Uh, when all is said today, 50 years from now, people mention your name. What do you want them to say about you?
I love my players with all my heart. That's it.
Well, I love this episode. I think this has been an incredible episode. What final comments do you have for our listeners out there?
Well, next time you watch a football game, realize that what matters is not what you thought, maybe.
Yeah.
Yes, the one loss record is important, and that's why we keep records. And when you have the big game, you have to win, and that's not all bad either, um, because you learn to operate under duress. But most of all, learn that when you step into the huddle, there is no racism, there is no sexism, there's no anti-Semitism, there's no misogyny, there's no hating somebody because of the way they voted. That's your teammate, and you love each other regardless. You may not agree on anything except one thing, and we're brothers here, and we're going to do this thing. This is our huddle. This is our team. It's a beautiful thing to experience. And so the next time you see a good football team, and this is for good football teams. You can be a bad football team and have all kind of divisions and hatred and racism, and get your butt kicked every Saturday or every Sunday, and you will. You will. That's a promise. Or you can stick together and be really hard to beat, and you can have an experience that'll stick with you the rest of your life. You can have the Willie Davises who change lives. Great leaders change lives, and they do it with love every time.
Perfectly said. This has been an amazing episode. The sports fan of me does appreciate this. This has been incredible. Folks, we hope you like what we're doing here on the Shadows Podcast. Check us out on theshadowspodcast.com. We'll be back next week with another episode.